Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Rangers Review morning briefing for Wednesday, the 12th of April. Another full squad this morning. We're at full strength these days, which is absolutely fantastic. First of all, I'm joined by Joshua Barrie. How are we doing, Joshua?
Yeah, good, Derek. Good to be here.
Absolutely brilliant. And Stevie Clifford for the second day in a row. How's it going, Stevie?
Wonderful, Derek. The sun is shining. The birds are tweetering outside. It's a glorious morning.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's sun is shining down here also in this lovely spring morning down in the northwest of England. Let's talk Rangers, folks. Before we do that, just a bit of housekeeping as ever. Quick word for our podcast sponsors, Seneca Hair Restoration, the #1 hair transplant group in Europe. Looking for a hair transplant or perhaps just restoring some lost self-confidence, and these are the guys to go to. The top hair transplant corporation in Europe, so they are the guys to go to. And as ever, I've bunked the all important links in the description box. If you want to subscribe to the website, just £2 for 2 months worth of content. Head over to rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe to sign up. It's dead easy to do so, just £2.99 per month. Thereafter, even at that, it's an absolute bargain. Right, bit of an eventful, a number of things hitting the headlines in Rangers land yesterday, guys. The big news is that Nottingham Forest, according to The Athletic, have been in contact with Rangers to secure a deal for Ross Wilson to become their next sporting director. It's after they sacked Filippo Giraldi. He was relieved of his duties and then looking to replace him. Wilson, of course, has worked in England before at the likes of Huddersfield Town and Southampton. He joined Rangers in 2019, taking over from Mark Allen. Forest are believed to be keen on Wilson. They've apparently been keeping tabs on him for some time. Currently struggling in the Premier League at the moment, but they've identified Ross Wilson as a man they are looking to step in to become their next sporting director. Joshua, your reaction to that news yesterday? I thought it was quite surprising, I've got to say, when I first heard about it. However, the social media landscape tells us that the vast majority of the supporters are actually quite pleased to see him possibly moving on. We all know he's not flavour of the month amongst the Rangers fan base, but what's your reaction to the news?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, if someone like David Ornstein is reporting it, then that's kind of a good as news source, as good a news source as they come, Derek. He says there's contact being made between the two clubs, and I think that getting into it, there's so much to get into within that. Firstly, you're right, he's not flavour of the month, and Johnny wrote a piece a couple of months ago that I think summed it up well. It's got to a point with Ross Wilson at Rangers where it's about perception, and I think in part because of a lack of communication at points. I think in part because of poor recruitment. I think in part because of maybe a lack of communication at both good points and bad points. This reputation has built up to a point where how do you bring it back to gaining popularity within the fan base? And everyone's seen the protests at recent games. On that basis, it's a move that would make sense because it would be leaving for a club as opposed to just leaving a club kind of off the bat and going to another job. Nottingham Forest, obviously, I think they signed 25 players, was it, in the summer? So they've had a very, obviously, an up and down time with their recruitment. Wilson has obviously faced a lot of criticism at Rangers, but seems to have a really good reputation elsewhere in football. Otherwise, he obviously wouldn't be getting another job in the Premier League. But I think, again, working on the basis of the Athletic's report, it would make sense probably for all parties if that were to happen, because it's got to a point with the perception of Wilson amongst the support base that's difficult to rebuild. I think the director of football model is important if Rangers want to bridge the gap in Europe. It's difficult to know exactly what Wilson's reign has been when it comes to things like recruitment. That obviously differs from job to job and club to club and maybe manager to manager. We can get into it, but if you look at the way that Gio spoke about transfer targets, the way that Beale did, it's very different. Beale was writing yesterday about how, looking at his number 9 comments ahead of the summer, and he says specifically he's got someone in mind. I don't think we ever heard Gio in a press conference say that he had someone specifically in mind. So you'd imagine that manager to manager recruitment can be more specifically manager-led. But overall, I think that lack of communication at points hasn't helped him. And if he were to go down to Nottingham Forest, then it'd probably be, at this stage, have to say a move that would suit all parties.
Yeah, lots of comments coming in. Stevie, seemed, as I mentioned, that looking at a quick look at social media, we've seen that the protests at recent matches as well. Ross Wilson, not the favourite person amongst the Rangers fan base at the moment. Is that fair? Do you think? And what did you make of the news yesterday?
Delighted with the news. I'm not going to mix my words. You know how I feel about him. I've commented on it and on this for a very long time, basically the best part of the last year. I've written about him, I've spoken about him, and I don't think it will be a universally unpopular decision. So, look, the fact of the matter is that the proof is in the pudding. Ross Wilson is director of football. We're now facing a situation where the whole squad needs turned over. We're 12 points behind our nearest rivals. We haven't won a league game against them in nearly a year and a half, and we're facing another treble. These are all things that have happened under Ross Wilson's watch. His transfer record is sketchy at best. It's less than 50% hit rate. It's very less than 50% hit rate. And in all honesty, it needs to be so much better. When you look at recruitment last summer, when you look at recruitment last January, really key moments and Rangers going for titles and trying to retain titles and things like that, he fell woefully short. So no, I'm sorry. I will be as honest as I've always been on here. I'm really glad of the news. If Nottingham Forest are taking him and we're getting a payout for it as well, then it basically saves us removing him, which at some point we would have had to have done. So I'm delighted with it. I hope it goes through. I don't feel any ill towards him. I don't sit here and, I wish him all the best, but I just wish him all the best away from Rangers Football Club. He's too highly paid for the level of the service that he's given us and the job that he's done. So, no, I'm glad that he's going, and I don't think there's much there that you can really hold on to aside of maybe a spattering of good signings, possibly, Derek. But there's not been a realistic amount. When you look about the squad and the value of it now, it's plummeted in the years gone by. There's several key assets about to walk out the door, contracts long term. Next summer we're facing the same thing. So has he done a good job? No, I'm sorry, I don't think he has. And I'm looking forward to a change in that department.
It's just a good comment here, Derek, that I think kind of sums up this discussion well. It's basically saying the lack of communication around his role probably contributes to a lot of the confusion about it. Now, Ross Wilson said at the AGM that it's not him that signs players. You'd imagine there's the recruitment process will work whereby someone maybe like Beale, it will be more led by him and he'll have specific targets. I think Todd Cantwell very much smells of a Michael Beale signing. Nico Raskin, we know, was on the club's radar before, but you'd imagine that Beale was very keen to push for that as well. Other signing, someone like Aaron Ramsey, I don't think that was someone that Gio would have went out and identified, for example. So I think it points that, that lack of communication hasn't helped. Wilson would point to, I'm sure, the fees Rangers earn for specifically the likes of Calvin Bassey and Nathan Patterson, and point to that as good work. But I think the difficulty is that sporting director role hasn't been communicated well enough. And as a result of that, maybe sometimes good things he's done will be behind the scenes that people haven't been able to see, because he's obviously got a good reputation, a good enough reputation to get a Premier League job for a reason. But the point I'm trying to make is that people maybe don't really know that, and then the only thing that he's judged on is transfers. And Stevie's right, you can't look at the state of the squad this summer and say that it's in a healthy position. You can't look at it and say it's in a healthier position than it was 2 seasons ago. When you look at the value of the likes of Kent and Morelos and Kamara, and take it forward to this season, and how much money you're going to get for, well, not the former two, but even Kamara, someone who was worth a lot of money a couple of seasons ago. So there's so much, I think, scope in this debate. I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I listened to a podcast with Stuart Webber, the Norwich City, I can't remember if his title sporting director or director of football.
Yeah.
And he spoke about that importance of communicating his role, of being a figurehead aside from the manager. You know, the idea of having someone, a sporting director or a director of football, is to provide continuity between squads, provide continuity between playing styles and management styles. And I think to be a bit more of maybe a figurehead and be able to take praise at the right times, take criticism, but ultimately be able to communicate. And I think a lot of this debate comes round to the lack of that, maybe compared to someone like Webber at Norwich, which is an interesting example of a kind of sporting director model if people want to look into it more.
Yeah, we've been awash with comments coming in, folks. I seem to think that once the fans start protesting about you and bringing banners to games, I think that the writing is on the wall, and it certainly, I think it would be the best thing for Ross Wilson to depart for pastures new. Of course, like you say, Joshua, he still has a bit of a reputation down south, hence why Nottingham Forest feel that he is the man to come in there. They have been a bit of a basket case, Forest, this season. I think they'll do really well if they can avoid relegation. They brought in 6,000 players, I think, in the summer. Yeah. So he's got a job on his hand. But listen, he's going to have a vast amount more money to spend down there. It's pretty much not more or less a blank checkbook, but you'll get more funds to spend than he did at Rangers. And there was an interesting comment coming in. So many, we'll try and get to a few of them. Ross says, is it fair to only rate Ross Wilson's time at the club based solely on transfer? Sorry for cancelling your face there, Stevie. It's just a big comment that's came in. I'm sure he has many more he's leaning over. I'm sure he has many more responsibilities than recruitment. We'll need to replace him with someone who has huge experience, and that ties in with a number of other comments. Gordon Bond says, who would you get in, Stevie? And ditto comment here, would you like to see it replace him if it's true and he does go? I seen David Weir mentioned yesterday. I think his name has been mentioned the last few weeks, of course, working down at Brighton at the moment. I've got to admit, lads, there's not a name that springs to the forefront of my mind as a potential replacement at this moment in time. Is there anyone that you would like to see come in, Stevie? Or does Andy Rundle raise a good point? He says, if Wilson leaves, do you think we will continue with this sporting director model?
Well, I would say there's a wee bit more about Ross Wilson to kind of quantify it. You know, in my opinion, you look at stuff like the situation with the medical department as well, Derek, and, you know, Dr. Waller leaving and never being replaced adequately. There's issues with the scouting department. You know, Andy Scoulden left, and it was a long time before anything was done about him. So there's lots of little points in there that frustrate, that come under his role of you know, looking after the football department. If you look at all levels of the club, Rangers aren't performing. They aren't winning. When you look at the B team, the under-18s, etc., they're all not winning leagues. So when people ask more questions about it, they'll point to this kind of thing. They'll point to the fact that Michael Beale was allowed to leave Rangers, and then we appointed another manager who was then sacked to go and appoint Michael Beale, which cost the club millions of pounds. There's things like this that people will say to. But the fact is that people will look at what happens on the park first and foremost, the state of the squad, the quality of signings, and that is his remit. So he's in charge of the whole footballing department. I don't think anybody will watch it and say, "Why?" But listen, we've signed Ravi Matondo for $3 million, and he's not really featuring. But, you know, look at the work he's done up at the training ground. It doesn't really equate to anything. So this is your issue you've got. And whilst the communication might not have been great, it doesn't really need the club to come out and tell us, you know, Ross Wilson's doing a good job because we've got new lights up at the training ground. So that doesn't really factor for me. I just think it's the right time for everyone. You know, let's get that kind of freshness in. With regards to who comes in, I think that John Park, currently there, has got a real good chance of possibly getting the job. He's currently in the scouting department. He's got a really good reputation, obviously, and he knows an eye for the player. So he's one that maybe might be an outside bet. Then if you want to go really outside the box and think about somebody that's got a reputation with the club and out with Christian Erlinger done the job at Bayern Munich, and he's sitting, he's more than capable. So I would like to see us go outside the box and see who's really interested in the position if we're going to carry it on. So I do think it's one that's needed, but I think that whoever comes in, they need to be more. I think they need to be much more spot on with the transfers and things like that. We can't have a percentage rate as low as it is at the moment, Derek. We don't have millions of pounds, and this goes on to what I discussed in today's article for Rangers Review, that if Rangers have got £15 million, our margin of error in that transfer summer spending isn't high at all. If we're spending 4 million on Ben Davies, 5 million on Yilmaz, 2 million on Cholak, 3 million on Matondo, and the only one that's regularly starting is Ben Davies, that's not good enough for this club in terms of what we need. And I know Joshua might want it, and I know there's little different things and stuff like that, but this has been the issue that I've constantly went on about what we've spent last summer. It's not that these guys are bad players or anything like that, but what did we need last summer? It's like last January. What did we really need at that point to go and try and win leagues, to go and try and renew things? It was clear that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst didn't fancy the signings because he never played them. Aaron Ramsey was fit, never even got a look in. So that tells you a lot. If he was dying to get him in, he would have been playing. So, whoever comes in, we need to make sure that they're working closely with the manager and they get the right players that are ready to come in. If his signings had more like January, where it's the likes of Cantwell, it's the likes of Raskin, who are a bit more forward-thinking, who are good deals with the club, then I'm sure that Ross Wilson would have had a better reputation amongst the fan base than he has now. But the fact of the matter is he signed guys that ultimately have failed at the club and he's had to move out almost instantly. So we're here again on the summer, and that's the issue. So whoever comes in, Derek, got to be a lot better.
Just to come back on a couple of things there. I mean, I think the point about Beale being in the building, how popular would that have been? If you take us back to November 2021 or 2, was it? 2022, 21? I can't remember the years. 2021, the years have merged in.
When
Gio was appointed.
2021.
2021. That was a hugely popular appointment. I don't think Beale, if Rangers had appointed Beale at that point, I don't know how popular an appointment that would have been, because it's very different to when he goes away. Yes, he hadn't proved himself as a manager at that point because he'd only managed 4 or 5 months at QPR, but I think he'd built on his reputation. And obviously, I agree with Stevie that domestically Gio wasn't a good appointment. I don't think his style, I don't think it suited where Rangers needed to go. But obviously, in mitigation for that, we always need to remember that he was within penalty kicks of winning the European trophy, which is the kind of weird tension you always have to hold discussions with that within. The transfer one is difficult because we know that Gio wanted to keep around experienced players last summer. And this ties into what both Stevie and I, the point that I think we're both making around responsibility and whether there is one person at the top that kind of holds all the cards, holds the responsibility for decisions. Again, to go back to Ross Wilson's comments at the AGM, he was very straight in saying he does not sign players. This isn't a case of him sitting on Wyscout and picking a few players he likes and giving them to the manager. The process is complex, I'm sure, and I'm sure different managers, as mentioned, Gio, I'm sure, was more comfortable working in a director of football model where, as he said repeatedly, right up until just before he was sacked, speaking about there not being a Gio list but a Rangers list, about how everyone would work together, the recruitment department, the manager, to form those targets. As mentioned, I think you can just tell from the way that Beale speaks, from his press conferences, where he is saying specifically, I've got a number 9, I'm not going to tell you about him, that he is more specific in the player that he's identified. And I think the language that he's used, I don't know if Stevie agrees from sitting in press conferences, but I think the language that Beale uses is more intentional about specific players. So obviously we're speaking on the presumption that Ross Wilson has gone to Nottingham Forest, which to our knowledge has not happened at the moment. An approach has been made, the clubs are in contact, and until he goes, obviously then we can talk. The discussion about who is to succeed him will be more of an interesting one, because I think that director of football model will stay. But going forward, that I do think there needs to be more communication about the role and the transfers, because that's ultimately, as Stevie correctly says, that's what people are going to judge it on. There might be great improvements in the club overall, or with certain things at the training grounds, but people will look at Rabbi Matondo and Ridvan Yilmaz, the money that was spent on them, not being involved at all on Saturday when Rangers lose again at Parkhead, and justifiably say, well, who's responsible for this use of money? Why was this not spent better? And obviously we could speak for an hour about the mitigation of that, for and against it, but I definitely agree with that overall point that it comes down to what you do in a pitch. And a quote just to end that we've said before, the Bayer Leverkusen sporting director, whose name escapes me, says you can plan 5 years ahead in football as long as you win on Saturday. And that's probably, I think, the most adequate example of what a sporting director has to face up to in football. They can talk about processes all they want, but that only matters if people can, I think, go to a game and with confidence watch their team win. And that's the kind of unique challenge of being at Rangers as well.
Can I just say as well, Derek, that I think we should point out Ross Wilson and money bringing into the club and sales of Calvin Bassey, Nathan Patterson, Joe Rebo. He's done really well. So I don't want to be completely slanted. And listen, I'm not a fan. I think everybody knows that. But for balance, I think it would be obtuse to ignore that and just pretend that it didn't happen. There's a lot of money being brought in, and whoever comes in next, the model will be there. And yes, look, I would like somebody that come in, and I don't know what people feel about this, but whoever comes in needs to be a wee bit stronger, Derek, in that if Alfredo Morelos has got no intention of renewing his contract and there's 2 years to go, that's the kind of tough decisions we need to make, and somebody that comes in needs to make, where they need to sit down and go, we need to maximise this for the club. Joshua, do you think that's fair? Like, we need to do what's best. He needs to have more of an insight into that, instead of being somebody that's maybe not strong enough to do that with the management team, Steven Gerrard, etc. We need to be stronger in saying, look, no, Borna Barisic has got 2 years left. He's not going to renew, or we're not going to renew him. So this is a time to move him on. Now, we've seen it done at other clubs. I think that's a fair point, or something that would be somebody that comes in needs to make the tougher decisions. So, listen, a balanced conversation around Ross Wilson. You have to acknowledge the outgoings and the work he's done there. And there's lots of other wee bits that you could throw in and out. I just don't think overall he's done the best job possible. And look, Tim, players were sold off the back of the European run. I get that, completely understand that. And Gio had a massive part to play in Calvin Bassey. But club have then still got to go and negotiate that deal. They've still got to go and get that and maximise that. So he did do it. So it's just a caveat point there, Derek, to everything. Yeah. And listen, I've got lots of things to say about Ross Wilson, but in fairness, I think it would be wrong not to mention that.
Yeah. Right, let's get to so many comments coming in, folks. I'll get to a few of them. First of all, slightly left field, but a big congratulations in order to Dave Fulton, who celebrates his 52nd birthday today. He's off out for a few pints this afternoon with his Betty. I hope you have a great day, Dave, from everyone at the Rangers Review. And lots of comments coming in with regards to Ross Wilson. Interesting point from Stephen Smith. He says, I thought the manager had final say on signing, so why is Ross getting it in the neck? And a point here, John Turner says, take it, there will be a fee. I'm sure there will be, Joshua. I'm not entirely sure what his contract situation is at present, but there will surely be a fee forthcoming for Rangers to receive should Ross Wilson leave and join Nottingham Forest, which should be welcomed.
Oh yeah, you'd imagine, obviously, because he's under contract, there would be a fee involved in that. just to go back there to the point Stevie makes about selling players at the right time, that's a great point that's kind of sometimes gets missed a little bit. Maybe in this whole debate, it's not easy. I mean, you look at Liverpool this year, who were 2 games away from one of the great modern sporting achievements and winning basically the quadruple, wasn't it? The 4 major trophies, which would have been unprecedented. Get to the top of the mountain, and then this season it completely falls off, and by April they've got nothing to play for. That to say, it's not easy to sell players at the right time and transition squads at the right time and whatnot. But definitely, when you look at the value of certain players and when you look at where it was, it's hard to not look back and say at certain points maybe there should have been a more concerted effort to get players not out the door, but to take clubs up on offers when they happen. Now, that the response to that may be that the offers only came in at points where Rangers were maybe chasing the 55th league title, and if you put the shoe in the other foot and Rangers had went and sold Morelos and not won that league title, that would have been unforgivable. So there is, of course, context to that. But yeah, selling players at the right time, as has been done with the likes of Barrie and Patterson, can't be said for other players, especially as we look into the summer and Kent and Morelos being out of contract as it stands.
Yeah, Tim says, hopefully we can negotiate a £20 million compensation fee for us. Yeah, absolutely. Premier League clubs are flush with cash, so stump up Forest, please. Right, let's get to a few more comments. First of all, Andy McKinnon says, hi, gents. Any words on a live show would be a good night out with the boys. Keep your eyes peeled for that one, Andy. There may very well be an exciting announcement at some point down the line. That is certainly something that I think loads of you would like to see, and us likewise. So, yeah, stay tuned for that one. Right, let's get to other news that's hitting the Rangers headlines. Well, first of all, world's greatest DJ, good friend of the show, gets in touch. Poses a question to you, Joshua. Did Josh get any indication from Neil Banfield that he has ideas on new signings? Anything you can tell us, Joshua?
Well, I mean, obviously there's going to be new signings. Beale, I think, in every press conference, every interview is looking ahead to the summer, and that had the column out yesterday, and that's kind of what that was saying. The tension between, similar to what Stevie's saying this morning, there's real positives, I think, in what Beale's doing. He needs and wants the summer to be here. He spoke about having 9 games in the way to Sky Sports before the Old Firm at the weekend because the summer is a chance for him to really form his team. There's a reason that managers don't really take jobs. A lot of them don't take jobs mid-season because pre-season is so important for that, not least because Beale needs his players in to get him to where he wants to be. Stevie and I were speaking about this yesterday. If you look at a game like Saturday, especially taking into consideration the goal that was disallowed, what more can Beale do? I don't think much more at all. It's not as if Celtic had loads of control. It's not as if they created the type of chances or were able to attack Rangers' box consistently as they were in the 2 heavy defeats within the last year and a half. I think the game came down to execution in both boxes. And Beale, I think, will justifiably look at that and say, well, I need new players to drive that on. And again, he said to Sky post-match, it was an interview with Ailey Barber, that he almost feels like he's getting as much as he can out of this squad. And I think it's telling that outside of the Old Firms, they're picking up maximum points, and he's corrected what he inherited from the situation he did when Rangers had dropped points against St Mirren, St Johnstone and Livingston. But to take them on that next stage, to go and win games at Parkhead and win cup finals, he obviously needs signings in there, not only to provide the energy and the freshness that Raskin and Cantwell have, but to kind of win both boxes as they couldn't at the weekend. So, yeah, there'll of course be new signings in the summer. I don't think there's any controversy to that.
Yeah, there certainly will be. World's Greatest DJ also with an interesting point. That the other big news yesterday, folks, I'm sure you've seen it, that the Dave King story is really interesting. He says, I'd personally like Dave to get more involved again. A true blue for sure. This is news that emerged last night that he had rejected a £25 million bid for his major shareholding in Rangers. The former chairman has accused the Ibrox board of squandering their advantage over Celtic and undervaluing the club on the back of their recent successes. This was an exclusive from Chris Jack on the website last night, folks. That's after King pulled out of his agreement with Club 1872, which would have seen the supporter organisation become the largest independent individual shareholders in RIFC PLC earlier this year, as he labelled the proposal as futile following a slow take-up to the multi-million-pound plan. A statement he released, he's been a vocal critic, as we know, of former chairman Douglas Park before he stepped down from the board last week, and he's urged successor John Bennett to adopt a fresh approach to put the interests of supporters first. King said, since 55, the board has squandered the advantage that we worked so hard to achieve. The current 12-point gap between Rangers and Celtic clearly suggests this, and has completely lost sight of the biggest stakeholder group in the club. It is the supporters, not the directors, who should be prioritised. Hopefully the removal of Douglas will allow the board to put supporters first once again. By doing so, the board commit to ensuring there will be no repeat of this season. Like most supporters and many shareholders, I am demoralised by the continuation of the Douglas Park-led board. He was chairman at the time to look after their personal interests ahead of the club. No sooner had the board rejected a fully funded offer of new shares at 40 pence than they issued substantial shares to themselves at 25 pence. This is after previously stating that shares would no longer be issued at the low price of 25 pence. 25 pence is the price that prevailed before 55, before the Europa League final and before the re-emergence to Champions League football. It massively undervalues our club and our recent achievements. It then goes on to say, I recently turned down an unconditional cash offer of 40 pence from a group other than Kyle Fox's, so 40 pence is presently a fair price. 25 pence undervalues the price of the shares by almost 40%, and I wonder how the board would react if supporters asked for a 40% discount on next season's ticket prices as an equivalent. Rangers have been approached for comment, folks, but Stevie, what's your reaction to that news last night?
It's quite a pointed statement. When you listen to it, he's had more than one little dig at the boardroom there, especially Douglas. What I would say is that I think before we get to the share stuff, I think he makes a very obvious point, which a lot of us feel that the fans have been pushed to the side. What I've communicated back to the club is exactly that there seems to be a gap between us and them, which has appeared through certain decisions that have been made, and that needs to be bridged once again for us all to get back on the same track, which is what's really needed. So there's that to consider. So whether you like it or not, I think he's got a point in that. Where it kind of falls down for me and where I have trouble, Derek, is that if we're led to believe that he wanted 13 million for his share issue from Club 1872, which I believe is somewhere around what the shares are worth, why is he turning down a bid for 25 million? That doesn't quite ring true to me. So I'm unsure of exactly where that is, and I'm not going to say if it really is true. It's just that sometimes you can wonder why we're sceptical with that kind of stuff. But with regards to the share issue, he's quite sharply, more or less, accusing of the board of being self-serving, which is a really interesting one, because this board, despite all their faults or whatever you might think about them, they have funded this club through COVID and things like that when Dave King walked away. So to say now that they're suddenly self-serving in that is really strong. And I don't particularly agree with that in the slightest. So it's all right saying that they turned down a 40 pence offer and things like that to Kyle Fox, which is where I think he's hinting at a fully funded offer. It's really difficult because that isn't as straightforward as it seems also. And Dave's quite clever at kind of putting pressure on where necessarily you're not telling the full story. So I really like Dave King. It should never be forgotten what he's done for the club. But I just think that, the constant attacks on this boardroom, although some of it has relevance, I don't think it's needed, and I don't think it's what we particularly want as a fan base as well. The reaction to it now isn't, what's Dave King said? It's, here's Dave King again. That's where it is, Derek. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So even if he's got a point to make, it's lost. And that's kind of how I feel about it. Yeah.
Differing opposing views in the comments is a point here. So, the board are pumping money into the club. He just didn't like the price of their equity conversion. He says he's at it. But lots of King supporters out there as well. There's an interesting point that was raised. I'll try and find it. For the life of me, I can't bring it up, but I'll try and have a look. But the timing, Joshua, is it any coincidence after an Old Firm defeat, I guess, that we're hearing news of this? It's quite easy to, I mean, as Stevie says, a 12-point gap doesn't look good in terms of the optics. So I guess it's pretty easy for him to have a go at the board. But as he says, of course, there is a change in chairmanship now, and John Bennett is at the helm. So it'll be interesting to see if there's going to be a turnaround and approach from Rangers behind the scenes.
Yeah, obviously that's just, you're going to put out your message in whatever kind of business or sport when the person you're criticising has just suffered a defeat or whatever. But no, I agree with Stevie. I think obviously it's a different thing, kind of criticising performance on the park and then criticising the board, who I think, even when, as Stevie says, they face criticism for the result on the pitch. And to go back to the point we've made kind of for the whole show, that is ultimately how people will judge the success of the club, because that's why, they go along the weekend, because they want to see their team win. That's a different thing to saying that certain people have looked after themselves, which I think most people would, definitely myself included, rebuff. So it kind of obviously got lost as well last night in the reports. David Ornstein reports about Ross Wilson, but busy night after a quiet day on Twitter.
Yeah, as we mentioned, folks, Rangers have been approached for comment, not only on that news from Dave King, but also on the reports that Nottingham Forest are hoping to lure Ross Wilson to the Forest ground. That's what it's Forest ground. Is it City ground down there?
City ground.
City ground.
It's City ground.
Yeah, it's a City ground, absolutely. So, watch this space, folks, with regards to that big news happening at Ibrox. But in terms of today's show, I think that'll do us there. Another bumper episode. Big thanks to Stevie, as ever, for joining us. It's greatly appreciated. And likewise, Joshua, too. I'll be back again tomorrow. Should be on with Chris Jack. So hopefully we'll have an update on that Dave King story, and we'll also discuss Ross Wilson and a lot more. We hope you can join us for that. Just a quick reminder as well, if you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, you can see a little ticker below. If you want to subscribe to the website, head over to rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe, just £2 for 2 months worth of content. You can enjoy Stevie's article on the website this morning, which is a cracking read. Johnny McFarlane's also got an interesting piece on there, which I'd urge you to check out, on New Edmonton House and how it's not a vanity project. It certainly sparked debate, the creation of that just outside Ibrox. So do go have a read of that as well. Okay, folks, thanks very much to everyone for joining us, and we'll speak to you again tomorrow. Bye for now.